What is it that has us hold on to blame? That makes it so hard. You know, it's like forgiving's this great idea until you really have something to forgive. You know, what makes us really hold on? And there's a fear that if we forgive, that we're kind of opening the gateways to get trampled again. They're just going to do it again. We're just making ourselves vulnerable. So I want to just clarify for a moment maybe a bit of what forgiveness or compassion is and is not. That forgiveness in no way is approval. It's not like saying it's okay that you did that. It's okay that you're hurting me, or it's okay that I'm hurting you. In other words, we need to have wise discrimination. We need to be able to say, yeah, this is injurious. Forgiving isn't putting down boundaries. You can open your heart, but keep your boundaries in your life in a way that protects you and loved ones from injury. In fact, I often think of it that you can forgive and vow never again. You can forgive. In fact, if we're forgiving, we're really going to be present with our experience. Take action from that presence that really moves towards healing. You can forgive and divorce. You can forgive and not spend time with. You can forgive and sue. Do you see what I'm saying? You know, you can do what you want to do, or what feels healthy. So here's the deal, though. When we don't forgive, in other words, when we're caught in blame, and you can kind of be scanning your life right now, because as you know, when I do these particular talks, I'm going to ask you to pick somewhere where you feel like there's a distance and where you're holding on to some resentment or blame. Okay? Since you know that, we're going to do that. When we're not forgiving, when we're in blame, we're in a trance. When we're in fight-flight, our aperture gets smaller. We're filtering the other in a much more narrowed way, and all we can see is what our story is telling us. This is wrongness. We're not seeing the whole human. Our primitive brain actually tightens and narrows the filtering system when we're in survival mode. So only a small amount of information is flowing. Similarly, when we're in survival mode and we're blaming, we're not perceiving the fullness of who we are. Okay? We're the reactive victim. Let's reflect on this for a moment. You're hearing words, and I'd like you to check in and kind of ground it in your experience. So use the pause to, if you in some way left your body, just come back again. Feel your breath, feel your body. So you might consider someone in your closer circle of family or friends or people you are with regularly. And I wouldn't pick a person where the relationship is traumatic in some way, because that won't serve you right now. But where there's reactivity, where you've in some way locked into a feeling of blame. You're wrong. You're bad. And take some moments to just examine if you let the situation be really right here for you, so you can remember what's behind the blaming, so that you can then sense, how does the other appear to me when I'm in blaming mode? How are you viewing, how has this person in some way become characterized by wrongness, badness, how has your aversion shaped this person in your mind? Do you have just certain pictures you're seeing of the person with certain expressions on their face that don't include the pictures of perhaps when this person's being generous or kind or entertained or happy or more at peace with themselves? In other words, how is your picture and image and sense of the person narrowed? And just letting yourself feel the blame, let yourself get in touch with it. You know, what it is, what's behind it again, so that you can feel the sense of it in your body. What seems wrong. And as you feel that, just sense your experience of yourself, who you are when you're in blaming mode. Do you like yourself? What's your mind feel like when you're blaming? Your heart. Is there a sense of being an oppressed self or a victimized self? Just noticing what, when you're in blaming mode, you're not aware of about yourself, perhaps, what you've lost contact with. You can continue to reflect and listen if you'd like. You can open your eyes, but there's a trance that goes on, a narrowing, that's actually very seductive and can last, as I mentioned, for decades, especially feeling like a victim. It doesn't matter how much hurt has happened, to lock into that identity is a trance, because we forget who we are. It's the same thing when we subscribe to having an enemy out there, that same narrowing, whether it's a certain group of people or a country, religion, a politician, a political party. Really, I mean, politics puts us into an incredible trance. Many people I know that are the most mindful, most awake, collapse into a reactive delusion and a righteous rage when it comes to politics. And I can watch it in myself. And, you know, it's hard. It's almost like that part's exempt. You know, everything else, you know, I can feel one way, but politics, I'm right, you know. So it's a trance. And so then the inquiry is, well, what motivates us to wake up out of that trance? What motivates us, like Nachiketa, to say, you know, any blaming, anywhere I'm not forgiving, is keeping me from realizing the truth of who others are and who I am. Anytime we're in that victim role, anytime we're making another wrong, making ourselves wrong, it's a trance. So what motivates us is really that we start getting the pain of that trance. It makes us lonely. It makes us anxious. It makes us not like ourselves. It makes us distant from others. I often think about, in Carlos Castañeda's books, the shaman Don Juan has a teaching about death. And since we're talking about Lord Yaman and how really the wisdom of impermanence can help us to realize, hey, might as well forgive. We don't have that long, you know. He describes death on our left shoulder. And he says, when death makes the slightest gesture, all our pettiness falls away. Now, you might be thinking, yeah, but this wound and this, you know, anger, hatred, or blame isn't petty. But it's actually the same teaching, that if we knew we were going to die in a few minutes, or if we knew somebody else was going to die in a few minutes, how would we want to be holding ourselves or that other person? I don't think we'd want to be doing it in that blaming mode. So then we can start to begin to sense that we each have that deep wisdom that Nachiketa had, that knows that our hearts are unfree when we're caught in blame. We each have that wisdom. So how do we reopen the channels? I mean, how do we take that aperture that gets closed down in fight flight and start opening into attend and befriend? And the basic process, from what I've found in myself and others, is that it begins by being with the pain that's in our own hearts, that we cannot forgive another until we've brought compassion and presence to the pain inside us, and that to try to forgive someone else first is going to be premature transcendence. It's not going to be real. It's going to be an idea of forgiveness. To forgive, we have to start here. I'll share a story. A friend of mine who I've been in touch with over the years, he lived with a long-standing resentment. After college, after graduate school, actually, he and a friend went into business together, and the business went south. It just did not go well. They just weren't well matched, and so there's a lot of conflict. His friend left the business, but took a number of major clients with him in what felt like an underhanded way. So this guy felt very, very betrayed. And that bad feeling of betrayed, victim, injury, lasted for several decades. Actually lasted till he began meditation and bringing this knot of pain to a lot of his practice to it. And really got that he was living inside a victim stance, and that this was not the only place, because it's never that we're a victim in one place. It's one of the, I talk about the spacesuit self, when we kind of sense an identity and try to make it through the world, and victim is one of those things that we do in a lot of places. And so he realized that, and his process began with his own feelings of, well, what happens when I believe he's bad? And he could feel the kind of rage, but also a kind of impotence, like powerlessness. It was easier to blame his ex-business partner than feel that powerlessness, just feel it. So he started feeling the powerlessness, how he felt foolish that he had been taken advantage of, how he felt in some way it was his own fault, his own weakness, his own lack of awareness. And so for quite a while, every time the story of what's wrong with him would come up, why is he like that? Why did he do that? What's wrong with him? He's bad. He would instead say, okay, let go of that story, and he'd just feel his own powerlessness, his own hurt, his own sense of his own impotency or deficiency, until that pain was enough that he could actually begin to sense compassion towards it. It's like when we really get we're suffering. And I call it ouch, when we really just say, this hurts. Then some place in us expands so we can begin to be kind towards ourselves, and that's what happened for him. And after a while, I asked him that question of, who would you be if you no longer believed he was bad? And that's a really, really important question. Who would you be if you no longer believe that the person you've been resenting all this time was bad or wrong? He just was what he was. You're not a victim, he's not wrong. Well, what he'd believe was who he could be outside of that victim role. He couldn't put too many words to it, but he said alive, free, and with a future. Possibility. It was kind of exhilarating. So, victimhood's a prison, but we cannot command ourselves to forgive the other person. It doesn't go like that, and I want to make a real point of that, because so many times we hear, oh, forgiveness is a good thing, but we just can't will it. I've shared at different times the first teacher that I considered a spiritual teacher was emotionally abusive with me and a number of other people. And it was a terribly painful thing. I felt really, really betrayed. And, so for a number of years after I left the spiritual community, I was living in that sense of I had been hurt, I was victimized by him, and sensing, a badness to him. He had abused his power, and he was bad. And part of the challenge was so many other people agreed with me that I got a lot of reinforcement for he's bad, and yes, you were treated terribly. But what started becoming very real was that was a very small place to live in. So I had this real strong urge to stop making him wrong and just to get on with my life. But every time I'd think of him, I'd feel really angry. And so then I started really being down on myself for not being able to just forgive and be more open and have that kind of empowered whatever. I'm sharing that with you because I could not change the timetable. I couldn't say, okay, stop being angry at him. So I started discovering that when anger would come up, I would just say, forgiven, forgiven, to the anger. I would hold the anger with presence and kindness. Didn't mean I would go into the storyline. I started really catching on that the storyline of what he did and what was wrong and how he shouldn't have, it just didn't work. But I would stay with the feelings of the anger and say, forgiven, forgiven. And that let me open to the pure, this hurt. This felt like a betrayal, it hurt. And the kind of self-compassion that then I could actually look at him and see him through the eyes of a forgiving heart. I couldn't will it, but I could become willing. And that's all we can do with forgiveness. We can't will to get rid of the blame or hatred. We can become willing to deepen our attention.